All right. We're back for another episode of the Rebel Talk podcast. I would like to welcome Dr. Navaz Habib. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am really excited to have you here. We had the opportunity to meet back in November, to which I was privy to get a copy of your book, which is incredible. And so before we do a deep dive of what you're doing and the vagus nerve and dissecting and really understanding that, because I've since learned that my audience is very interested in this part of health, why don't you give us a little rundown of your journey, how you became a chiropractor, how you're now in functional medicine, and even your own healing journey, which I have actually listened to snippets of.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you. So we can start my journey back when I was, I guess in chiropractic college was when I really hit my rock bottom in terms of health. I got up to 250 pounds, and on a smaller frame, I'm 5'7". It obviously was not a healthy weight to be in. And at the same time, it was kind of an ironic situation that I was in a health college learning how to be healthy and how to share health with my clients, and yet I wasn't able to manifest that in myself. And so there was obviously a missing piece. The link just didn't show up. And so when I finally graduated from chiropractic college, lucky enough to be valedictorian of my class, I stepped out and immediately started thinking about how can I make this change? How can I improve? Initially thinking about my weight. Right? Because, weight was the problem. But it turns out that weight was just a sign of what was not working internally, what was not happening from a root cause. I wasn't able to look at that. And so I started some calorie counting and trying out different diets here and there and, over-exercising and the basics that most people go through with minimal results and a lot of like yo-yoing and back and forth with the weight and the number there. And then I was introduced to functional medicine by Sachin Patel, my mentor, a really, really great friend of mine. He introduced me to this idea that what if the weight wasn't the actual problem? What if it was we needed to figure out why my body at that time was holding on to this extra weight? What was it that was triggering this response? What if we were to dig deeper to figure out what that was? And I started getting some functional lab testing done. I started figuring out there was some nutrients missing, what was happening in my gut. At the same time, I was dealing with IBS, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, borderline diabetic in my 20s, fatty liver. All of these issues were coming up. And sadly, it's not uncommon right now, but we're now realizing that each person has their own journey and there's different reasons for why each person has their own trigger, which is why there's not a single solution for it. So with functional medicine, I was able to identify what those triggers were for me. And I was able to start making some specific changes, starting to go with like dietary changes. What were some of the habits that I was holding on to, some of the lifestyle factors that I was holding on to? Lucky enough to have my wife along for the ride with me, who kind of supported and made sure that I was on track all the time and made sure that she was kind of keeping me sorted through all of this. I ended up losing about 75 pounds without trying to significantly lose weight. And at the same time had improvements in my gut function, improvements in my blood sugar, and just major changes overall. But the biggest one that I noticed, and it didn't occur to me until I finally had it, was energy. I woke up every day excited to get out of bed and excited to do what I could and to improve the lives of others, to impact the lives of others positively, because it impacted me so much. I was ready to go and share that with the world. And so it was time for me to jump in both feet and join the functional medicine crew and get into it and help people identify what was causing their health challenges. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years.
Yeah, your story is very inspiring. And it's always the practitioners who have that kind of personal hero's journey. Okay. that I think people feel super attached to. A binder fell if somebody heard that sound. And so I think that that's so incredible, because I know when there is that lens on it. There's a different way you're communicating that information. You're also humanizing that experience because you've been through there. You've had to dig deep and get really real about what it was that was holding you back from having the health. And I think that's what's so inspiring, because for a lot of people, they would look at us and say like, but you like, it's because you know everything. It's because you know medicine and you understand nutrition and you understand physiology. I would love to briefly unpack a little bit, because I think you said something really, really important that I think would be tangible and exciting for people. What were those habits or routines or emotions that were possibly holding you back from achieving your goals?
Great question. There were a lot of negative emotions. There was a lot of blaming myself, a lot of negative self-talk that was triggering some of the habits and the patterns that I was developing. The most common one, and this was the biggest change that really affected me positively, was canceling cable. What a simple little trick, because what I found was I had this habit, and it was something that I built up. My love language is quality time. I very much love to just sit and spend time with people. I don't necessarily need to be talking, not so much on the physical touch or receiving gifts or anything like that. It was very much just a quality time person. And with my parents, we spent a lot of our quality time sitting on the couch, watching TV and just kind of bonding and talking. And me and my mom used to watch ER every Thursday night from 10 to 11. It was like our go-to daily thing. And it's just this positive memory that I had. But I realized that I was snacking a lot during that time. And there was a very strong bond between some of those habits and very much talking, wanting or aspiring to have that connection, that quality time feeling. But for whatever reason, my wife and I don't have the exact same TV or show preferences. And so canceling cable actually forced us to step away from the TV for some time and to actually connect and bond in a different way and to talk a lot more. And what that did was take me away from the kitchen and create a whole new positive habit. So for me, it was just this idea that it had to be the same way. And all of a sudden we made a decision. It shifted, and that was probably the biggest one to give me focus back and create a whole new attention on what was possible for me.
I love that. I love that so much, because people want to look at so many other factors, and it's, I got an email 2 days ago. This is why this is so palpable. Like, nothing has changed, but I haven't changed my diet and I haven't done this. It's like, well, you're not hearing yourself. But it also is in the simplicity of like, what if we just change the routine up and break the habits and free yourself from that? So I think that's beautifully empowering for people. So thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about your incredible book, Activate Your Vagus Nerve. This is something people want to know more about. They want to understand. I think, it's a pretty cool area, because even though you're talking about one specific nerve, because its actions are so vast in the body, it really has this holism piece to it. So can you tell us what the vagus nerve is, why you wrote a book about the vagus nerve, and we'll take it from there.
So coming from a chiropractic background, there's always kind of this idea of the brain and the nervous system having a very important effect in the body. And it was really cool for me going through university, going through chiropractic college, learning about all of the nerves, but especially the vagus nerve. It always kind of stuck out as an interesting one. It's the only cranial nerve. It starts in the brainstem. It's the only cranial nerve that leaves the cranial cavity, or the head, essentially. It's the only one that courses anywhere but the head. And that was a really interesting piece. And then I realized, as I was looking at the anatomy of it, the vagus nerve courses right beside the carotid artery and the jugular vein, the blood vessels that bring blood to and from the brain, the most important blood vessels for our conscious thinking and to ensure that we're staying alive. And so it courses right beside that, one on each side of the neck, and goes down into the chest cavity, the thorax, and into the abdomen, and innervates a vast array of organs. It innervates the heart, the lungs, the airways, courses down past the diaphragm and into the abdomen to attach to the stomach, the small intestine, large intestine, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, spleen, kidneys, you name it. There's a vagus nerve connection to it. And that's where the name vagus came from. It came from the word vague, meaning wanderer. It was this simple little physical connection that was connecting the gut and the brain and all of the other abdominal organs. And it was the tool that was sending that information from the brain to those organs to do the job that they need to do, ideally in an optimal scenario. But then I dug a little bit deeper into what the vagus nerve information was actually being passed on it. And as we know, you and I both know, the gut-brain connection is so strong. And how the information is passed from the gut to the brain is actually physically connected through the vagus nerve. 80% of the information on the vagus nerve is from the gut and the other organs towards the brain. It's not a brain connection to those organs, it's those organs connecting to the brain. You can essentially think of the vagus nerve as that connecting piece for the thermostat of the body. Essentially, we cannot check to see what's going on without the vagus nerve. But then 15% of the information that comes down is coming from the brain to those organs in a parasympathetic function. So what it's doing is essentially shifting us and ensuring that we remain in a rest, digest, and recovery state. That's really important to keep in mind because so many of us sit in the fight and flight sympathetic side of this autonomic nervous system. And what the autonomic nervous system is, in just very basic terms, is the neurological control of all of the systems inside our body that we're not consciously controlling. So I'm not consciously thinking about detoxifying through my liver, or I'm not consciously thinking about peristalsis in my small intestine, but those functions are happening automatically because of this subconscious control. And that subconscious control is either going to shift us into fight or flight when there's a stressor that comes up, or into the rest, digest, and recovery state, which is mediated through the vagus nerve, and that's the parasympathetic side. So what's really important is to be in that parasympathetic side about 80 to 90% of the time. We should not be under stress constantly. And I realize like this is such a simple thing to think about, but we are sending so many signals through what we do, how we think, how we breathe to our brain that are actually triggering us to be in that fight or flight sympathetic mode all the time, or at least a vast majority of the time, more than we should be.
Yeah, that was awesome. I really loved your explanation there. I think that's going to help clarify why we are so fascinated by the vagus nerve. And I laughed because I'm pretty sure the way we societally function is that those stats are reversed, right? I'm sure we are hanging out in fight or flight, the sympathetic mode, 80 to 90% of the time. I think that's probably a fair thing to say.
More than likely, yeah.
And so that's where I think we have to understand what we can control. So, because, I mean, we're in a phase right now where we're very much paused. I think people are actually reevaluating their life and looking at, you know, the chaos and the busyness that we once all were caught up in. And now we're like taking a moment to actually look at that and say, well, does this make sense for me? It's actually a very exciting time where we might start, you know, actually leveraging this whole vagus nerve piece. So when we are in a state of fight or flight, or when there are imbalances, can you help us understand maybe what diseases we would see, what imbalances, what chronic health issues start to arise when this is out of balance?
It's a great question. And the simple answer is essentially any chronic condition that you can think of is linked to inaction and poor function of the vagus nerve. Really, because we now know through tons and tons of research that essentially inflammation is the trigger for all of these chronic health conditions, whether they're autoimmune, whether they're metabolic, whether they're digestive. Inflammation is that kind of trigger. And when we can't put the brakes on inflammation and control that inflammation is when these issues come up. We start to notice rheumatoid arthritis, MS, myasthenia gravis, Crohn's, colitis, eczema, psoriasis. These are all conditions triggered by immune overreaction and inflammatory responses. And what tends to be kind of that missing piece of the puzzle is that in that 15% of what the vagus nerve does with that parasympathetic function is it actually is the brakes for the inflammatory system. That's the coolest thing about what the vagus nerve does, is that it controls a system called the cholinergic anti-inflammatory system. And that is the piece of the puzzle that is missed by so many practitioners out there, by so many people not realizing just how important this nerve truly is. So what the vagus nerve has is a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, ACH. And that specific neurotransmitter is required to decrease the inflammatory response, especially in a chronic scenario. We know inflammation is necessary as an acute response to stressors. You bump your arm, you get a bruise, that's inflammation, but ideally that bruise goes away. Same idea occurs in the gut. Same idea occurs with autoimmunity. If we can't control that inflammation, the immune system goes and overreacts. The macrophages overreact. They go and create a negative response in different places, and they're not being controlled. So the conditions that we see are all linked to when that system is not working correctly. We tend to then notice the Hashimoto's thyroiditis. We start to notice the Crohn's and colitis and all of those challenges because we're not controlling the inflammatory response. And that's really, really important.
I love that. And I think your book does a really good job of outlining all the areas, the dysfunctions that can arise when we see this happening. The other part I really loved about your book were all the very viable solutions. So, you know, when you've identified that these imbalances are there for your population, how are you helping to empower them to be the person who is activating their vagus nerve and healing through this? Because I think this is super important. You bring up some really amazing, very easy, if you're willing to make the changes, approaches to actually help people be in the driver's seat and understand that they're in control of this.
Absolutely. Health is a commitment, right? And it's not something that you achieve. It's not an aspirational thing. You're healthy because you continuously work at being healthy. And that comes down, that's the answer for a lot of people that they're missing. I want this single pill that's going to make me healthy. That's not the way it works, right? So we need to look at that. What are the consistent things that we can do to improve our overall health? And that's where I work with my clients to empower them to ensure that they feel the difference when they do these things consistently. And essentially consistency carves canyons. We know that. So what are those exercises? What are those tools? Well, before we get into what the exercises are, and they're really simple. They're like, you're going to hear them and be like, what? That's going to help? Yes, they will. But you have to kind of know where you're starting. And so I'm all about measuring and getting some objective evidence as to what's actually happening. And so how do you measure vagus nerve function to begin with? And how do you know what's really working? I believe you've got one on right now. The Aura Ring is the best tool for me. I absolutely love it. I love getting my HRV stats every morning to see how I was for the last 8 hours. Was I doing well? Did my HRV go up? Was I ready to take on more challenge today? Essentially, this is a wonderful tool that athletes have actually figured out to use on a regular basis. They wake up and they check their HRV first thing in the morning to see just how hard they should push themselves that day. What it's telling them is how well did you recover last night. The higher your heart rate variability, the better your vagus nerve was functioning, the better your recovery, the more you can push yourself the next day.
Okay, I'm gonna get you to pause because you're right. I got so excited about interventions that we need to do a deep dive on HRV because I just got this. I'm so excited about it, and I actually do think there are really great biofeedback tools to help people understand this. So, a higher HRV percentage is a good thing.
Absolutely. So the
Okay,
higher the HRV, the better your vagus nerve is functioning. The reason for that comes down to specifically, let's talk a little bit about what HRV is. So all of us know what heart rate is. It's beats per minute. How many times is your heart beating in a full minute, in 60 seconds? A good number for your heart rate is anywhere between kind of 50 and 70. 60 is the average. That's what we normally see. If your heart didn't have any nerves innervating it, it would be beating on its own at 100 beats per minute, which is relatively high. It's kind of what you want when you're working out. You want to get that heart rate up because you're creating that aerobic response. And then if you really want to push it, we can get into the anaerobic stuff, but we're not going to go there. Without any innervation to the heart, whether it's sympathetic or parasympathetic, that number is at 100. But what parasympathetic innervation does, the vagus nerve does, is it slows the heart rate down. It brings it into that 50 to 70 number. For the average person, that's where you want to see your heart rate. If your heart rate is really, really low, more than likely you're a super athlete or there's something really going wrong in your vagus nerve. And if you're over 70, it means that your vagus nerve is weak. And so we need to look at that in terms of heart rate. But what heart rate variability is actually a bit of a difference. What we're looking at there is what is the time in milliseconds between beats per minute averaged, or between beats, averaged over a period of time. So let's say, for example, we have beat 1, ba-dum, and then beat 2, ba-dum, and we've got, between those two beats, we've got about 300 to 500 milliseconds, okay? The next beat, if it's 400 to 600, let's say it's 300 for the first one, 400 for the second one, the difference between those two is 100 milliseconds. And what that means is then we're averaging out at 100 milliseconds of variability. Okay. There's a variation. That is what we're looking at. And averaged over a period of time, so we're looking ideally at over 5 to 10 minutes, we can see what that HRV pattern is and how high the average number is. The higher the average number, the better your vagus nerve is functioning, because what it's doing is it's counteracting your heart's desire to go back to that 100 number and bring it back down towards that 50, 60, or 70. So it's counteracting not only the heart itself, but the sympathetic innervation, which is trying to increase your heart rate to bring it back to the normal rate. And we don't have constant innervation. It's not like we have this constant information coming from the vagus nerve. It comes in spurts, in short spurts. It's not constant like the sympathetic side. So what tends to happen is we go up a little bit and come down, and go up a little bit and come down. And so that variation is a sign of just how strong the vagus nerve is working. If it's not varying enough, then that's telling us that sympathetic is stronger and vagus is weaker.
It's winning. Hence why we're all hanging out in this like overstimulated. Awesome. So you're probably talking to all of your patients about this and having some kind of heart rate variability. Oura Ring is your favorite?
Oura Ring is my favorite. It isn't the cheapest tool, but it is absolutely one of the best because you get that number over a long period of time, 8 hours. Okay. There are a couple of other decent tools and more that are coming out every day. We know that wearables are becoming so common that we're just adding more measurement tools to it. So I know Apple Watch recently has started to add in HRV as a tool. I talk about this in the book, but I love Elite HRV, the Core Sense tool, which you stick your finger into, really easy. HeartMath is amazing. Yeah. Put it on your ear. I've got a few sitting up here as gifts for patients. But these are great tools to see what your heart rate variability is. If you have that objective evidence, if you can measure it, you can manage it. And if you can't measure it, it's so hard to create a new response or a new habit when you're not measuring what the number truly is.
I love that. And I know like the Oura Ring gets a lot of attention for its sleep metrics, which I appreciate, but I really wanted to understand more. So thank you. That was awesome. So once you teach individuals about this, then they have some way of tracking all of these easier lifestyle interventions and how well they are able to stimulate that vagus nerve.
Exactly.
So walk us through that, because that's really empowering and exciting, because this is something people can actually get your book and start implementing. So
totally. I'll go through a few really great exercises and how we can measure it on HRV. So if you remember earlier, I was talking about 80% of the information on vagus nerve is coming up from the gut, from all the organs in the abdomen and the thorax to the brain, and 15% was going down. That leaves a 5% gap. And that 5% is where we can have that really great effect on creating more vagal tone. That's what we call essentially how strong is your vagus nerve. The stronger your vagal tone, the stronger your vagus nerve, essentially. So that 5% is where we have the opportunity to do a lot of work. We can't really change our parasympathetic nervous system. We can't really change the afferent information that's coming up, but we can change the motor and sensory innervation. That's where we can have that effect. So 1% of the information on vagus nerve is coming from sensation of the ear, skin on the ear. This is not for everybody. It's for people that are having really difficult times with the vagus nerve and really need some external support. So auricular acupuncture is one of the strongest tools to support the vagus nerve from an external therapeutic perspective to create that innervation and say, get to it. And it's just a wonderful supercharger to get the vagus nerve working again. Not for everybody, but certainly if the need is high, that's a great tool.
Awesome.
And then the other 4% of information on the vagus nerve is motor. And that's really important. So we know generally with nerves, they send a signal to muscles to do a job. For example, I want to go pick something up. It's going to send through specific nerves down through my brachial plexus to my bicep, to my hand to say, okay, let's pick this thing up and activate those muscles. Well, there's certain muscles that are innervated by the vagus nerve that we can then have a really positive effect with. Those muscles are particularly in the pharynx and the larynx, the back of the throat and the muscles around the vocal cords. And so this is where we can really use those exercises and create a big change and a big positive reaction. So the muscles at the back of the throat keep the airway open, keep the airway patent. And we know that so many of us breathe incorrectly, and making sure that that airway is working really well, we can then make a change accordingly. So what I have my patients do first off is check to see how you're breathing. First off, put one hand on your chest, put one hand on your belly, kind of sit there and take a breath and see which hand is moving. And if you notice that the hand on your chest is the one that's moving, that tells me that you're actually breathing incorrectly. You're not using your diaphragm. You're not breathing abdominally. You're using more of these upper back, shoulder muscles, the muscles that are used as accessory breathing muscles. You're using them as their primary drivers. And that is telling you that you're actually in that sympathetic state. It's actually telling your body that you're under stress. So in a stressful scenario, let's say you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, we're going to start to breathe shallow, breathe fast, get that oxygen in as quickly as we can with short, shallow breaths. At the same time, our heart's going to speed up, our pupils are going to dilate. We need to get away from this threat, whatever this stressful threat is. When we breathe that way, we're sending a signal to our brain that we cannot be in the rest, digest, and recovery state at this time. There's too much of a threat, and we need to fight it or flight from it, okay, or run from it. So breathing is an absolutely key tool. So what I have people do is anytime they start to feel a little bit extra, just a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of just like worry, do that breathing exercise and close your eyes and consciously try to shift the way you're breathing into your abdomen. Literally in 3 breaths, you can completely shift your entire outlook and how you're feeling. And it really calms you and puts you into that rest and digest state. And because the airway is so strongly involved in this, when we breathe through our abdomen and have our diaphragm creating that vacuum response in our lungs, we're actually opening the airway more, and it's creating more of a vagal tone response by allowing the airway to be bigger and allow more air to come.
Amazing.
So that's a simple one. Sorry, go for it.
No, keep going. I'm loving it. I'm like leaned in. You can tell I'm very engaged. Go.
The next one is how do we use the remainder of those muscles? How do we trigger a specific response there? And so gargling is actually my next one. My dad used to do this. I think I talked about it in the book. My dad used to gargle, and I used to laugh at him and say, "Why are you doing this?" And now I'm like writing a book with that. Like, Dad, you were absolutely right. I'm sorry. Yeah. I will now listen to you forever now that I'm out of the house.
Yeah, right.
So with gargling, what I recommend people do is keep a glass beside your sink in the washroom, and do this every morning and evening when you brush your teeth, okay? So take a glass and put in some warm water. Ideally, you can add a little bit of salt to it, some sea salt or Himalayan pink or something like that, because the salt is going to also help to break up some of the stuff that kind of builds up the mucus and the plaque that builds up in the back of the throat. So it'll have a nice antibacterial effect in addition to the gargling itself. And what I have people do is take 3 sips, one at a time, obviously, and for 30 seconds, gargle as hard as you possibly can. Have it happen as low in your throat as you possibly can. Get the kind of head up feeling. And what you're doing then is you're actually stimulating the pharyngeal muscles to keep the airway open, because we're trying to breathe out as we're gargling. You're going to make as loud a sound as you possibly can, which is going to trigger the laryngeal muscles, the muscles around the vocal cords, to create that tension and allow the vocal cords to have that fun kind of sound that comes from it. And it's doing its best to make sure you don't aspirate or take that water into your lungs. So it's almost like a supercharged exercise, like throwing 150 pounds on your barbell so you can do back squats. It's adding extra stress to a great exercise that you can already do. So gargling is really awesome. So for 30 seconds, 3 sips in the morning, 30 seconds each for 3 sips in the evening. You do that consistently, and you're going to start to notice big changes over time on that HRV number. And that means that your vagus nerve is working better. And what you're also doing is you're getting rid of some of that excess bacteria and promoting a very positive breathing environment. You're essentially teaching yourself to handle stress in a different way. And that's what's really cool about this.
Yeah, I think focusing on the breath is such an empowering tool for people, because you have to breathe anyway. So if we can learn to do this efficiently and actually have like positive and get the positive reinforcement from actually seeing heart rate variability shift, I think that's really empowering. I'm just selfishly going to ask you about, being a mouth breather at night, taping. Do you advocate, or do you have any feedback on these things? Because I actually am tracking, I am a mouth breather, and I am now tracking the data of deep sleep for taping my mouth versus not taping my mouth. And there seems to be a very distinct difference there. So I would love
I mouth tape 100%.
Yeah.
I, for a very long time, have been a mouth breather. What I do, because I also have a little bit of sinus issues and have trouble breathing through my nose, is I actually put a Breathe Right nasal strip on my nose to keep my nose open while I'm breathing through my nose. Awesome. And I will tape right across the lips to make sure that I don't breathe through my mouth. And I've actually noticed, and I've been doing this now for probably close to 2 years, about 80% of the nights, maybe a little bit more. And I've noticed major differences. I'm way more comfortable breathing through my nose now. And my HRV has gone up over that time. And my deep sleep numbers have definitely increased. I get much deeper restorative sleep at night when I tape versus when I don't. You're going to love experimenting with this Oura Ring. It's going to show you a whole lot, but that was something that I've noticed significantly. Too many of us breathe through our mouth. Our mouth is meant as our eating and drinking tool, and our nose is our breathing tool. We don't have nose hairs in our mouth. We can't filter out the air through our mouth. We can't filter it. We don't have teeth in our nose, so we can't eat through our nose. It's a great backup tool. The mouth is great as a backup in case something happens to the nose, but We should be breathing through our nose and eating and drinking through our mouth.
I love that. And I think what you're saying is so important and eye-opening, because I think so many people do breathe through their mouth, and now they can actually start to perceive this as that is a way that their body is speaking to them, that there is some dysfunction here. And we need to, evaluate that and shift that. And thank you for saying the nasal strip, because there are a lot of people who genuinely can't breathe through their nose. And so, that's an obstacle. So yeah, that's wonderful. Keep going. I know I have two in particular, but I'm going to let you just.
Totally, yeah. And that with breathing at night is the biggest time, because you're essentially spending 8 hours not consciously breathing, right? You're subconsciously doing this, but if you've built the habit of breathing through your mouth, you've actually built a really bad habit. So in addition to that, breathing through your mouth is going to dry out the saliva and allow bacteria levels to increase significantly. So there's a whole nother positive behind learning to breathe through your nose there as well. Mm-hmm. The next one that I'll kind of bring up is really out of the blue. In my research for the book, there were a few really interesting ones that popped up. I don't know if I'm going to infringe on some of the ones you wanted to talk about later on, but listening to music is one of the coolest things. And I really like this one because for a lot of people that are seeking productivity and seeking focus to get into a state of flow and just get some content put out there and really focus on getting some stuff done, music is a great tool to help people do that. So there was a really wonderful study done and replicated a while ago that essentially subjects were given an opportunity to listen to music, and they tested the HRV before and after listening to different types of music. And so classical music was shown to increase the HRV more than any other type of music. So that essentially had a very positive effect on the vagus nerve and got us into a very calm state. But there was a specific artist or composer that had a very higher response on the HRV, and that was Mozart. Mozart's music was actually one of the most amazing kind of tools to improve the HRV. But there was actually one more piece of the puzzle, which blew me away in my research. I was just like, what is happening here? There was one specific composition by Mozart that had a significantly higher HRV than any other composition, any other form of music. And that was a specific piece called K448, Two Pianos. I talk about it in the book. It's like a completely free 24-minute composition on YouTube. I've had people turn it on, press the repeat button, and go into a zone for 2.5, 3 hours, 4 hours of just productive work.
Wow.
It had this major effect on creating a sense of focus and just kind of allowing people to get into that state of flow, but at the same time, really, really good for vagus nerve function, because there's no stress. Essentially, you're telling your body that you're in absolute calmness. Rest, digest, and recovery is working.
I love that. I love having people on who know one area so well, because they're just able to really provide really cool tools that you just, we were featuring a generalist, like you just probably don't get into that like nitty gritty. Like, that's amazing. I'm going to try that today, actually.
Yeah, do it. You'll love it. I guarantee it.
Yeah. So the few ones that I selfishly wanted to bring up were cold exposure, because I talk about this all the time, and I need you to reaffirm my narrative for my audience. And then obviously, of course, like social connection and community. Yeah. We're very aligned there. So I would like to talk about those two.
For sure. So cold exposure is one that I always get that groan. Oh, what do you want me to take a cold shower? And the answer is yes, I absolutely do. Unless you have an autoimmune condition that's causing you to have decreased blood flow, this is an easy one to do. If you have that condition, please don't try this one. But cold exposure is essentially adding more weight to a stressful scenario and challenging you to function more optimally under a stressful circumstance. So that's why cold exposure works so well. If you live in Toronto, like the two of us do, going outside in the wintertime is more than enough cold exposure, especially without a jacket. But if you've ever heard of Wim Hof is one of the absolute coolest people on the planet. Dutch, really awesome guy. He's been pictured, and like there's videos of him doing this, climbing. He's climbed Everest in shorts and hiking boots. It's pretty spectacular. Like that's all he was wearing, climbing these mountains, sitting on ice, not feeling anything. He's actually even been shown through research studies to have been injected with endotoxin, and just by the use of his breathing, eliminated the endotoxin, these bacterial toxins that are supposed to kill you if you have that amount in your blood. He's eliminated it just by simply controlling his breathing. One of the coolest things. So what Wim Hof has created is this three-pronged approach: cold exposure, deep breathing, and commitment to the exercise. And by doing so, it's just this major vagus nerve response. It's completely anti-inflammatory, because what cold exposure does is it really triggers that cholinergic anti-inflammatory system by shutting down the inflammatory responses within our body, and by really ramping up vagus nerve function, which is really great. And in addition to that, you're adding this cold exposure to the breathing exercise, which requires you to learn how to breathe correctly again. And then with commitment, like we said, consistency carves canyons. It's just this really great approach that he's created. So with the cold exposure, there's different ways to incorporate it into your life. Cold showers are the way to start with this on a daily basis, really simple for most people to be able to do. Start your shower the normal way you do, complete all of your normal shower routine, but for the last 30 seconds of your shower, and I know you're not gonna like it the first couple times you do it, but try it out. Turn the water down to as cold as you possibly can and let it hit you on a sensitive area. For me, that's the back of my neck and upper back area. Mm-hmm. And that really triggers this response. And all of a sudden I feel like I'm under stress, get really tensed up, get those muscles really tight. But what I do is I close my eyes, I make sure I put my arms down, open up my fists, because all of us are constricting during that time. It's very easy to then, or to fix this, you want to release all of that. And then focus on deep abdominal breathing during that cold exposure. Start with 30 seconds. If you feel good, build it up. Go to a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes. Build it up to a point where eventually your entire shower can be cold and you're actually able to handle that scenario for a long period of time. What this is adding that challenge of being in a stressful environment to the exercise of breathing calmly. And what this will do over time is anytime a new stressor shows up, you now know how to pull yourself back into that parasympathetic mode that you need to be in, again, 80 to 90% of the time. That's what's really cool about cold exposure.
Thank you for saying that. I agree. And I actually am very religious about cold exposure now, because I feel fantastic. Like it is something that takes a little easing into, but once you get used to it, you actually start to crave it. And I actually will turn the shower back on if I've forgotten, because of how I yield. Like it gives me so much more in my day. So, and sleep if I do it before bed. So
absolutely.
All right. So let's just talk lastly about this community piece, which I know is a bit of a sensitive subject with where we're at and where we're going, this temporary pause in life, but let's talk about the importance of that for the vagus nerve and how we can possibly mitigate what we're going through.
Loneliness is now the number one known cause for all-cause mortality, morbidity, 100%. If we're not connecting with people, we are not happy. And that's why this quarantine for all of us has been so difficult. It's why we've made Zoom the biggest stock on the planet, because we just want to connect with people. To the point where, and this was a great point that Sachin had brought up a while ago, even in prison, what's the worst thing that can happen in prison?
I saw this in your book, yeah.
You get put into isolation. You get put into solitary confinement and you're by yourself, which is really interesting, because we would rather be surrounded by rapists and murderers than be by ourselves. It's just this idea that, my goodness, I just need to be around people. I need to connect with others. And what that connection with others does is it creates a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of happiness. And that is in itself parasympathetic. It allows us to be in that HRV high mode. It allows us to be in that vagal tone mode. When we laugh, we're happy. We don't laugh when we're under stress, right? If your boss comes by and says in your ear, I need to see you in my office right now, you're not going to be like, haha, this is so cool. That's not what happens. We get into this stressful scenario. We start to sweat and our heart rate and our breath rate goes up. But when we're calm and we're relaxed, we're then going to have this positive connection with others. And that's why community and being connected to so many people is so important. And yes, obviously very difficult subject right now. That said, this too will end. And we know that there will be an end to this. And we know that there's going to be a broad worldwide desire to just reconnect with people when this whole thing is done. And that will be a very positive thing, because we know that the challenges that come from loneliness include mental health issues, include autoimmunity, include metabolic dysfunction. All of these things are included. So if we can shift back and really create positive community feelings for others and help others not feel lonely, we're actually doing them a major positive service and helping with their health as well.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a really important part. And what I'm really appreciating about the work that you do and the way that you are empowering people with this information is that it truly is that upstream thinking. It's of course the nutrition and all those things matter, but when we have happiness, when we have tools to be empowered and to feel calm, that's when we're able to actually adhere to all of those health goals and desires that we need to actually transform our health. And so I think this is truly the most like upstream form of thinking in terms of how we actually cause lasting or create lasting change and health for our patients, for our community at large. So I think the work that you do is so important. And I really, truly enjoyed your book because I thought you did a great job of dissecting it, but also doing a good part of like providing very, very tangible tools for people to be able to access, so that when, you know, they're ready to go on this journey, they absolutely can take on, like, feel empowered in that. And I think that's so important. So I appreciate your work. I have a few last questions for you. First thing, is there a certain challenge or perceived failure in your life that you feel like upon hindsight you're incredibly grateful for because it, you know, propelled you, it helped you gain clarity on your mission, your purpose? Yeah,
absolutely. There is. Trying to figure out exactly how to bring this up, but there was a period of time over the last kind of couple of years that I was feeling really down on myself. I even, like, the book was coming out, all of these amazing things were happening in my life, and for whatever reason, I just didn't feel connected with myself. It happened to be that the job that I was in wasn't fitting what I felt like I needed to be doing. I had this desire to be my own boss again. I had this issue with not serving the type of people that I wanted to serve. And it resulted in financial issues. It resulted in major stress issues. I actually regained a bunch of weight during that time as well. And it just didn't put me in a very good place. But I wouldn't trade it for the world, because that was the trigger point that allowed me to realize what it is that I do want, and really make me grateful for every opportunity to follow that possibility, to actually step into what it is that I feel like I'm supposed to be doing. I just love every day of my life right now. It sent me into this completely strong, passionate feeling of what it is I need to be doing. Really allowed me to reconnect with the work that I was doing and the type of people that I want to work with. And like I said, I'm very much that quality time type of person. And over the last year, building my business up to where we are right now has really not been a challenge. It's been a very positive thing that I've gone through, and a very amazing kind of journey that I've taken. So I wouldn't change it for the world what I went through, but I really do feel that was probably the biggest challenge that triggered me.
Thank you for sharing. I think so many people will identify with that story, that, everything should look really perfect. You've got everything figured out, and yet you're still realizing that you're not fueling your potential, or you're not in alignment with where you need to be. And kudos to you for being brave enough to do that, because what is palpable is your passion and your commitment to show up and share this message in a very, very powerful, empowering way. So I think that's going to be motivating for a lot of people. What makes you rebellious?
I think there was a really great quote. I believe it was Oscar Wilde that said it. Whenever you're on the side of the majority, question yourself, figure out what you're doing.
Ooh, I love that.
I've completely paraphrased it. It's completely butchered from what the quote truly was. But that's what I took from it, right? And for me, if you're on the side of the majority, you might be kind of just complacent in what's happening and what's happening around you. I feel like I'm rebellious in that I don't want to follow the status quo. I believe that abundance is available to everybody. I believe that opportunity and hope and positive tools and gratitude are available to everybody. And so many of us, and I was one of those people for a very long time, I felt like I was inside the matrix. And for whatever reason, when I woke up, I was so excited. When I took the red pill, I was like, I'm ready to go. And The Matrix is kind of that movie that I always go back to. It always kind of links to what I was thinking. But I feel like when I took that red pill, I said, too many people are just plugged in. I need to unplug and step away. And so I feel like that was probably the best example of me being rebellious, for sure, is to step away from that common feeling. Keep in mind, words have huge meanings. And when you say something is normal, oftentimes it's not normal, it's simply common. And there's a big difference between common and normal.
I love that. I love that. Very relevant. I have some rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Possibly.
What is your superpower?
I believe my superpower is bringing passionate feelings about what health truly is to others. I really do think that's what it is.
Yeah, I think you're very good at that. When it comes to your health, what gives you your superpowers?
Really, for me, it was the trigger for me was my daughter. Was prior to having kids was when I made the commitment that I wanted to make the change, but it was really the driving factor, the motivating factor was I didn't want my kids to go through the same challenges that I've been going through or that I had gone through in the past. And I didn't want my kids to deal with weight and blood pressure and blood sugar issues. I know from family history that these are all challenges that have been there, autoimmunity, whatnot. And I wanted to teach my daughter, I wanted to teach my future children at the time, how not to have those same challenges, because those genetics are just getting passed on. So what can we do to make those changes?
Love it. Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Ooh, that's a good one. Best piece of advice I've ever
also
received.
Not rapid fire, but I do it every time.
Smile.
Smiling has an endorphin response. Smiling has an amazing effect on your own health, but it also has an amazing effect on everybody around you. I believe it was my grandfather who just always was smiling, and regardless of what he had been through, so many challenges in his life, being an immigrant and coming over here and trying to create a better life for his family and having gone through so much difficulty, but was always, always smiling. I don't remember a single time the man was frowning. And for me, that was probably the best advice that I ever got.
I love that. Also very relevant, because eye contact and smiling are not contagious. And so, well, they are contagious, but they're not COVID contagious. And so I think it's a really good reminder.
For sure.
How do you define your tribe?
My tribe is people that want to impact the world in a positive way. I work primarily with high-performing entrepreneurs, health professionals, and people that really want to create an end to suffering in the world. That's who my ideal client really is.
I've worked with athletes and people that really want to inspire others to do better, to be better, to hope, and to stop needless suffering all around the world.
Love that. And what do you do to fuel your wild heart?
I bike. I get on my bike, whether it's my Peloton or
You're a Pelotoner? Okay.
or onto my bike, and I get down to the lake and I ride across the lake, and I love just sitting and thinking by the water, meditating there. I often get a lot of my best ideas just being by myself for a period of time, having that quality time with myself. But obviously being very, having a lot of gratitude for the time that I have with my family and those things. But I kind of need some time for myself to think and to feel and to fuel that fire for sure.
Yeah, I very similar, because in this time of where we're all together, I've realized how introverted I am in terms of needing some like recoup energy alone. So yeah, I love that. Dr. Navaz Habib, I feel like you just rocked that. I really genuinely enjoyed that conversation. I feel like we got so much, like a wealth of information. Not only do I think you provided a lot of clarity about the vagus nerve and why we need to, you know, understand that better, but a lot of really usable tracking tools and interventions to vastly improve our health. So I really appreciate your time and your passion, and for you, you know, stepping into your own light, because now we all get to benefit from your incredible passion, which was so palpable. I truly enjoyed having you on. So where can people find you, connect you, get your book? How do people connect?
Book is available everywhere. Amazon's probably the easiest place to get it. It's called Activate Your Vagus Nerve. You can find me online. Healthupgraded.com is the business, the clinic. And you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, pretty much any channel there at Dr. Navaz Habib, Dr. Navaz Habib. And just really simply, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really, really do appreciate you having me on. And I feel like we're kindred spirits. We got to just keep this flowing and get more people into our tribes for sure.
I will have you back for sure. I really loved what you had to share. So thank you for your time.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.